3 weeks after her arrest, Deborah Harrington sat alone in her pristine living room, staring at the stack of papers her attorney had delivered. The emergency HOA board meeting had been scheduled without her knowledge. Board members she'd handpicked had unanimously voted to remove her as president pending investigation. Her phone, once constantly buzzing with texts from community members seeking favors or approvals, remained silent. The neighborhood that had feared her just weeks ago now openly celebrated her downfall. Susan from Unit 118 had organized a recovery barbecue for the weekend, pointedly excluding Deborah. The doorbell rang. Deborah nearly jumped out of her skin. These days, unexpected visitors usually meant more bad news. It was Marina Velasquez, now 8 months pregnant, standing on her porch with Detective Chen beside her. In Marina's arms was Clementine, wearing tiny protective booties over her healing paws. "Ms. Harrington," Detective Chen said formally, "Ms. Velasquez has something she'd like to discuss with you regarding the pending charges." Deborah's immediate instinct was to close the door, but her attorney had warned her that any perceived hostility toward the victim could worsen her case. "What do you want?" she asked, not inviting them inside. Marina stroked her cat's head gently. "I wanted you to see that Clementine is recovering, and I wanted to tell you in person that I've spoken with the prosecutor." Deborah's breath caught. The charges against her carried potential jail time, something her husband had reminded her daily since moving into the guest room. "The judge is considering community service instead of jail time," Marina continued, "but only if you agree to certain conditions." "What conditions?" Deborah asked suspiciously. 400 hours working at the animal shelter, Detective Chen explained, and mandatory counseling. Marina shifted uncomfortably, supporting her pregnant belly with one hand. "And you'd need to publicly apologize at the next HOA meeting and resign permanently from the board." "You want to humiliate me," Deborah said bitterly. "No," Marina replied, surprising her. "I want you to understand what you did wrong so you don't hurt anyone else. My therapist says some people use rules and control to mask their own insecurities." Deborah flinched at the amateur psychoanalysis. "You don't know anything about me. I know you've been lonely since your daughter stopped speaking to you 3 years ago," Marina said quietly. "Mrs. Chen mentioned it. She said you keep her picture hidden in your wallet." Tears pricked Deborah's eyes unexpectedly. Her daughter Eliza had cut contact after Deborah had tried to control her wedding, insisting on traditions and rules that her daughter hadn't wanted. "This is your chance," Detective Chen said, "to start making different choices." After they left, Deborah found herself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, really seeing herself for the first time in years. The tight, pinched expression, the rigid posture, the constant tension in her jaw. When had rules become more important than people? The next morning, Deborah did something unprecedented. She walked to Unit 204 and knocked on Marina's door, a small gift bag in hand. "These are special therapeutic booties for cats with injured paws," Deborah said awkwardly when Marina answered. "The pet store said they're better than homemade ones." Marina accepted the gift with cautious surprise. "Thank you. I'd like to accept the prosecutor's offer," Deborah said stiffly. "And I'm sorry about Clementine. It wasn't a full transformation. Decades of controlling behavior wouldn't disappear overnight." But as Deborah walked home, she noticed the colorful garden gnomes in Susan's yard, and for the first time, didn't mentally compose a violation notice. 2 weeks later, as Deborah sorted donations at the animal shelter, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Her heart raced as she answered. "Mom," Eliza's voice came through, tentative and guarded. "I saw the news about what happened. Dad said you're changing." "I'm trying," Deborah whispered, watching a volunteer gently place a rescued kitten in its new owner's arms. Outside the shelter window, she could see Detective Chen helping Marina, now days away from her due date, into his mother's house for what appeared to be a baby shower. Some battles weren't worth fighting, Deborah was slowly learning, but some bridges, perhaps, could still be rebuilt. The cat's howls echoed through the community center kitchen as Deborah Harrington, known universally as HOA Karen behind her back, slammed the industrial freezer door with a satisfied smirk. The animal's desperate scratching against metal faded as she twisted the lock with manicured fingers, her HOA president pin gleaming under fluorescent lights. "That'll teach those rule breakers," she muttered, smoothing her immaculate bob. "No pets means no pets." Deborah had spent the morning conducting her unauthorized safety inspection of the Sycamore Hills Community Center when she spotted the calico cat wandering near the kitchen. She recognized it immediately as the animal belonging to that pregnant teenager in Unit 204, that girl who kept insisting it was a support animal, despite Deborah's repeated citations for violating the HOA's strict no-pet policy. 15 minutes later, Marina Velasquez, 7 months pregnant and breathless from searching, burst through the community center doors. "Clementine?" she called, voice cracking with panic. "Has anyone seen an orange and black cat?" Deborah looked up from arranging a display of community violation notices, her thin lips pressed together. "Pets aren't allowed in common areas. It's right there in Section 17B of the covenant you signed." Marina's hands trembled as she clutched the doctor's letter in her pocket, the one certifying Clementine as her emotional support animal for pregnancy-related anxiety. "Please, I need my cat. She helps with my panic attacks." "Rules are rules," Deborah said, raising her chin. "Maybe this will be a valuable lesson about respecting community guidelines." What Deborah didn't notice was Detective James Chen standing in the doorway, who had come to drop off paperwork for his elderly mother's unit. His eyes narrowed as he watched the exchange, particularly at how Deborah's gaze kept flicking toward the kitchen. "Aren't sure your cat will turn up eventually," Deborah said with false sweetness. "Perhaps when you've reconsidered your petition to the board about changing our pet policy." Marina collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "I can't lose her. My doctor says the stress isn't good for the baby." Deborah checked her watch. "Well, I have a board meeting in 20 minutes to discuss the unapproved wind chimes in Unit 131. I simply must prepare." As Deborah swept past Detective Chen, he caught the distinct sound of scratching and muffled yowling coming from the kitchen. Frowning, he followed the noise to the large walk-in freezer, where the temperature gauge read a frigid -10 degrees Fahrenheit. "What the hell?" he muttered, twisting the handle. Inside, curled into a shivering ball, was a calico cat, her whiskers frosted and breathing shallow. Marina's scream, when she saw her beloved pet, echoed through the building. "Clementine, oh my God, she's freezing." Detective Chen wrapped the cat in his jacket, his law enforcement training kicking in as he assessed the animal's condition while Marina called her veterinarian in hysterics. "Who did this?" he demanded, as color slowly returned to the cat's ears. Marina's voice shook. "It had to be Deborah. She's the only one who has keys to everything, and she's been threatening to take care of the problem for weeks." Detective Chen's expression hardened. After ensuring Marina had safely departed for the emergency vet, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Captain, it's Chen. Remember that serial animal abuser case we've been building? I think I've got another incident to add, and this time, we've got a witness." Across the community, Deborah was just settling into her seat at the head of the HOA board table, blissfully unaware that her actions had just set into motion events that would shatter her carefully controlled world. Deborah Harrington's morning routine was sacred. Wake at 5:30 a.m., power walk through Sycamore Hills noting violations on her HOA tablet, followed by a precisely measured kale smoothie. By 8 a.m., she was typically filing complaint forms and planning strategic moves against homeowners who dared challenge her authority. But this morning, her doorbell rang at 7:15 a.m. "Absolutely unacceptable," she muttered, tightening her silk robe. When she opened the door, her complaint died on her lips at the sight of Detective Chen, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. "Deborah Harrington?" Detective Chen's voice was professionally neutral. "We need to speak with you regarding an incident at the community center yesterday involving animal cruelty." "Animal? This is absurd." Deborah's hand fluttered to her throat. "I'm the HOA president. Do you know how many violations I processed yesterday alone?" "You're welcome to explain at the station." We have witness testimony and security footage showing you placing Marina Velasquez's support animal in the freezer, where it nearly died. Deborah's face flushed. That cat was trespassing on community property. I was simply isolating it until animal control could arrive. In a freezer, with the temperature set to -10 degrees, Detective Chen raised an eyebrow. The veterinarian's report indicates the animal suffered moderate hypothermia and frostbite on its paw pads. This is a civil HOA matter, Deborah insisted, voice rising. That girl has been violating our bylaws for months. Animal cruelty is a criminal offense, Ms. Harrington. And emotional support animals are protected under fair housing laws. The neighbors began emerging from their houses, smartphones recording the unfolding drama. Deborah recognized Susan from Unit 118, who she'd fined last week for unapproved garden gnomes, smirking as she captured everything on video. "I need to make a call," Deborah stammered, trying to close the door. "You can make it from the station," Detective Chen said, presenting the warrant. "We also have a warrant to examine your computer and HOA records. We've received multiple complaints about your enforcement methods." At the station, Deborah sat rigidly in the interview room, demanding her attorney. When Harvey Goldman finally arrived, his expression was grim. "You've really stepped in it this time, Deborah," he said, reviewing the charges. "Animal cruelty, harassment, and potentially fraudulent use of HOA funds." Fraudulent? That's outrageous. They've been building a case for months. Multiple homeowners filed complaints about selective enforcement and financial discrepancies. The blood drained from Deborah's face. "Those renovation contracts for my kitchen, which you pushed through the board using HOA funds." "Yes, that's part of it." Detective Chen entered with a thick folder. "Ms. Harrington, I'm Detective James Chen, head of the Crimes Against Persons Unit. You should know that Marina Velasquez was hospitalized last night with pregnancy complications due to stress." "That's not my responsibility," Deborah said automatically, though her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, it potentially elevates the charges to include reckless endangerment of an unborn child." He spread photographs across the table. Clementine's frostbitten paws, Marina's hospital admission forms, and receipts for Deborah's granite countertops labeled as community improvements. "I was enforcing the rules," Deborah insisted. "Everything I've done has been for community standards, including the $15,000 in HOA funds diverted to your personal home improvements." Detective Chen asked quietly. Deborah's attorney placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Don't answer that." As Detective Chen outlined the growing case against her, Deborah's thoughts raced to damage control. She had connections. The mayor had attended her Christmas party, and Judge Williams played golf with her husband. "I want to speak to Captain Reynolds," she demanded. "William and I donated to his charity golf tournament last year." Detective Chen's smile was cold. "Captain Reynolds recused himself due to that connection. I'm handling this case personally. And I should mention, my mother lives in Unit 218, the one you threatened with fines for having a wheelchair ramp installed." For the first time in years, Deborah felt true fear as she realized the carefully constructed kingdom she ruled was collapsing around her.